Welcome everyone to the Tides of Innovation Distinguished Speaker Series. Today we're honored to have John Selker, who's an OSU Distinguished Professor of Biology and Ecological Engineering, and Director of both the Center for Transformative Environmental Monitoring Programs and the Trans-African Hydrometeorological Observatory, and PI of the openly published Environmental Sensing Laboratory. He has worked in over 20 countries, maybe 22 now, across 5 continents. His focus areas include environmental instrumentation, groundwater processes, and ecohydrology. He has published more than 230 peer-reviewed papers and is president of the AGU hydrology section, and has a raft of other things only academics worry about. John, thank you so much for joining our group, and take it away.
Okay, great to see everyone today. I'm going to go ahead and work towards sharing my screen. So hopefully this all goes well. Thank you all for being here. I'm sitting a bit out of your normal sphere. I'm sitting in Taiwan at the moment, and so a little different time zone. It's tomorrow. And what I'm trying to do is hide this one last piece here. Excuse me for a second. Enable, hide, show video. Okay, let's try that. Okay, anyway, for some reason there's a little bar across the top of my screen, so I don't know if I can get rid of that. But okay, so what I want to talk about today is a voyage that I've been on for a little while, trying to get some new environmental monitoring instrumentation to the community. And as part of that, I started working with many more undergraduates. And in this process, kind of really started to have a reawakening of the role of undergraduates and their education in the advancement of science. And I want to talk about kind of that little path. If I can get this advanced, there we go. So first I want to just kind of share with you some of my overarching theses in this talk. And one of them is the elephant in the room, which is that when we look at data, we are looking at the result of a measurement. And that measurement is filtered by the tools we have. But it's also filtered by the framework in which the people who developed those tools were taught in universities. And we could also say that the tools we use are filtered through the mathematics we learn and the instrumentation methodologies we learn. And so we become accustomed to data that has terrible defects in it at times. And that would include things like rain gauges. And I don't know how many of you have played with rain gauges, but basically, for example, the fact that if a bird decides to sit on a rain gauge, they can plug that rain gauge in a moment, and until someone gets out there and cleans it, that will be bad data and very difficult data to identify as being bad, because when there's no rain, the zeros are expected. So rain gauges have a terrible track record of performance, and yet that's we're still using the same ones we've been using for like on the order of 100 years. Another variable that I'm going to talk about is canopy interception, for example. And what's that? Well, if you've got a forest and it rains, the canopy intercepts on that water. And when I became aware of how hydrologists were trying to measure that, it was just remarkable that such an important variable was so poorly measured. And then a third example I'll bring up today is understanding snow and how it melts during a storm. And what it turns out is that all the measurements that people published, are almost all, were taken below -10 degrees C, because that's a very convenient temperature to work with snow. Otherwise, it melts. But what we want to study is its melting. And so there's been this real gap, a hidden gap in the snow literature based on that. So these are some of the things that the overarching concept here is: what are we missing? Where are we blinded and maybe unaware of being blinded? a couple of common traits and maybe contextual pieces that are not just about instrumentation but broader, is why are we sluggish in developing new environmental monitoring equipment, and we'll talk a little bit about why it is hard, but moreover how we can break through that sluggishness. I want to talk also about some emerging opportunities or perhaps new opportunities about co-development of new instrumentation through shareable designs. And that's we're going to talk about some of the new developments in sharing and in design crystallization with respect to when you make a design, is it on paper or is it a digital list of parameters, for example? So parametric design and how that fits into this kind of change that we're seeing. And then I want to talk about our experiment in what we call the Opens Lab and how that's gone. Give you a taste of some of the things that my students in the Opens Lab have developed, and then talk a little bit about, after all of the 6 or 7 years we've been doing this, what we've learned and how maybe you all and other people could get involved and make a global collaboratory that will make our world quite different looking than it is now. I first off want to, shout out to a bunch of people, so I have a lot of collaborators who are represented in this work. There's over 100 people who've contributed to this talk, so I can't thank them all, but they're there. I show pictures of Pete Varenga on the left. He was the guy who started a small company doing really high quality instrumentation, and just a gem of a person. And he really showed me that just if you want to, you can make a difference. Middle is Galen Campbell. Galen Campbell, one of my true heroes, developed the sonic anemometers for Campbell Scientific, for example, their 3D sonics, and then went on to start Decagon, which then became the Meter Group, which is internationally renowned for breaking out of the limitations of instrumentation. So he's another one of my mentors who I want to acknowledge and just point out that there are some really remarkable people who have been blazing a trail here for a long time. And then the RM Young Company, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Young recently and hearing the stories of how they built their incredible instrumentation. So there's a bunch of people, and Campbell Scientific's first instrument is shown up in the upper part of the right figure. Again, Campbell Scientific, which has put out really changed the way the world makes measurements. So I'm not in any way the first person to be working on this problem, and I want to just make sure everyone's really clear about that. That said, and is my little panel blocking the view here? I'm trying to figure out how to get this thing out of here.
No, we're not seeing it.
Oh, great. Okay, then I will ignore it. Sorry. Oh, now can I go back? Oh, I can't go back. Oh dear. Oh, that's funny. Oh darn. Okay. Well, we missed that slide, I guess. There we go. Okay. So I don't know how many of you do water quality monitoring, but in the upper right, you'll see the what's called the ISCO sampler. And that was the same sampler that I ran into in my graduate work with a whole pile of them that didn't work, and I was responsible for fixing them. And that was back in the late 80s. That tool looks much the same today as it did then. Yeah, a multi-sonde, everyone's very excited about multi-sondes. A multi-sonde is really just a single sonde with multiple plugged into the same, they make a bigger set of holes. Those are the same instruments we were using again back in the 80s. In fact, if you look at the Campbell lineup, it's great, robust instrumentation. Most of it is the same stuff that I was using 30 to 40 years ago. And so we're seeing that there's a fairly robust lack of innovation, if you really think about it. The ISCO sampler, for example, it has some real problems. It samples into open bottles. All the volatiles are lost. So these are things that we just accept, but they shouldn't be accepted. They are unacceptable. Let's see if I can. There we go. Okay. So What are some of the features of how we've been doing advancement in measurement? And so one of the things is that your students, the people who are running around campus in Illinois, are making lots of cool stuff to answer the questions that they're trying to address in their masters and PhDs and even undergraduate theses. Most of those innovations are scrambling efforts that are captured maybe partially in an appendix to a thesis, but are lost to the world for the most part. Most of the engineering details are lost. The details put in papers are too sparse to be reproducible. Furthermore, these are designs that came out of desperation rather than through a design process, an engineering design process. Now, scientists, I am mostly a scientist, also somewhat of an engineer, but the instruments designed by scientists are fundamentally different than those designed by a team of engineers. Things like electrostatic discharge robustness, things like signal to noise, a lot of pieces that scientists maybe are not aware of the contemporary methods in digital electronics. And so we tend to have things that are based on old technology that maybe these scientists were exposed to years ago, if they were exposed at all to the cutting edge of current engineering methods. At the same time, our engineering education focuses on theories rather than on real world applications. And I was mentioning earlier to Brian that I spent my childhood down in the basement in a shop breaking things, and I was shocked when I took a group of mechanical engineering students to what's called a milling machine, which is where we make things, and I held a piece down with a hold down bowl, and I put 20 foot-pounds of force on the wrench, and I said, well, how much retaining force do I have on this piece of material? And not one of the mechanical engineering students, these were juniors and seniors, could even talk me through how you would get the number. If I put a block on a plane and I pushed it laterally, drew a little force diagram, maybe they'd get it. But translating what they had learned in statics and dynamics to a wrench on a threaded object was really hard for them. And it turns out, why was I, a hydrologist, teaching mechanical engineers how to use a milling machine? It's because now in mechanical engineering, they do not require hands-on training with those machines. They do not require mechanical engineers to actually touch a nut or a bolt. So this is very, for me, troubling. We really have to have our engineering students learn engineering. And I don't think you do that through little block diagrams on a piece of paper. And then as I mentioned earlier, the commercial sector is very slow moving. And so why is that? And one of the reasons is because they stand a lot of risk. When you go in to develop a new product, there's a lot of risk that it won't work, or that the idea is not great. And so there's the valley of death between a new idea and an actual product. And so how can we, as an academic community, do a better job of narrowing that gap? You might say, well, gee, John, that's all great, but are there really things out there that are going to change the world? And this is a Nature paper back in 2016, and I've just looked on their website. They now have a product out, and it's about a 5 kilogram ball. What it is a group of scientists in Scotland took the etching process from chip manufacturing, microelectronic machining, and they were able to make a force balance that was extremely accurate. So they can measure the force of gravity down to microgals, so on the order of a couple of microgals. Now you say, well, why do I care about measuring gravity? Well, how many of you have wondered how much water is stored in the subsurface? We right now drill wells, and we see the water level, but actually the full mass of water stored provides a gravitational signal. And so most gravimeters that are adequately accurate to monitor groundwater cost on the order of $100,000. But now we have something the size of a cube of sugar that measures almost as accurately, within a factor of 2 as accurately as a liquid nitrogen cooled superconducting gravity emitter. And so what we see then is you could start deploying gravity measuring devices around the state of Illinois and seeing exactly how much pore space is left in your soil aquifer system before that next storm hits, or see exactly the depletion of an aquifer that's being overpumped or that's near being overpumped, and be able to help manage that aquifer with real-time data. So these sorts of developments, where we take something that was $100,000 and make it into $1,000, when you reduce something by a factor of 100 in cost, and then when we combine that, which we'll talk about later, with things like radio telemetry, so that we can have those data in real time for real management decision making, I hope you'll agree that these sorts of developments really are potentially transformative. So, first question I want to ask is who to engage in this when we're trying to close this valley of doom. Who is it that we should engage? Pre-COVID, we focused a lot of our technological efforts on making new flat screens and making new chips and by and large making new stuff. But what we saw during COVID was that it's all about people. It's all about enabling people to do work, and it's about training people to be ready to do work on using new technologies and in a new working environment. And so in that same time, I was really moving towards working more with undergraduates. And one of the reasons was that they are at this place in their life where they can make big changes. They can see what's possible, gain from real world experiences, and then reposition themselves. Whereas graduate students have by and large already positioned themselves where they want to be. Secondly, the undergraduates, I think, are feeling more and more disconnected from their world. They're looking at things on flat panels, and they are not necessarily feeling like they are hands-on in touch with the world and addressing the global needs. And they have a strong desire to be those people who make a difference. So how can we give them that pathway to feel like they're making a difference? Further, if you get a master's student and you say, hey, I want to help you with your master's thesis, and their first mindset is, oh, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to come up with some new scientific discovery that's going to be so important. So I better find a really, really, really big topic, and it'll be too big to get a thesis done, et cetera, et cetera. We all know that kind of thing. The undergraduates, on the other hand, are really interested in being focused. You say, hey, do you want to work on this? Yes, I want to work on that. I want to work on that. And you're going to pay me by the hour to do it. And this is fantastic because that's what I want to do. So many times I see undergraduates are far more capable of getting something completed in a very focused way. It's much more satisfying for them than it is for graduate students. Finally, the cost issue has really gotten out of hand. It's right now $90,000 a year for me to bring in a master's student, where I can have about, for $9,000 a year, I can keep an undergraduate as employed as they want to be, basically, in terms of the number of hours. So getting it like on the order of 12 hours of work a week. So that 10 to 1 differential cost with a group of people who are, when you're paying them, they're only doing your work. It really is a tremendous cost advantage, which you can't ignore. Some of the downsides that we initially considered as downsides, at least, working with undergraduates, is they typically only spend, say, 2 to 2.5 years in my lab. We get them as maybe a year or two into their program, and they'll stay maybe through the end of their junior or senior year. And so there's a lot of turnover. But what the interesting thing for us was that this forced us into an extremely rigorous documentation process. And that was really key to our results anyway. We wanted to document stuff. And so, because we wanted to be able to share it with the world. And so it turned out that the turnover really made us be better engineers on our side. The lack of experience is why they are there, but it also means we have to have a really rigorous mentorship program. So I have a lab director, I've got a lab work manager, and I've got a lab technical staff person. So we have, for 40 students, we have 3 full-time staffers who are giving them the guidance they need. And then we do this multi-generational teaming, and we tend to put the undergraduates as the project leads. So they are actually the people designated to be the leads, whereas graduate students would be their clients, and so would myself and other faculty who are looking for things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about hardware and software. And this was a revelation for me about 10 years ago, that we now email our technology. So when I do when Apple makes a design for a new pencil or a tablet, the chances are that doesn't show up on a piece of paper. And it really is a design that you could reconfigure with a stroke of a keyboard. You can completely reconfigure designs. And so this idea of being able to email technology and then have people reformat that technology to work for them just by changing a single parameter is a remarkable development. And so all of a sudden, collaboration and communication globally was transformed in engineering design by parametric design. As we've talked, sensor technology, and you know from your own smartphone, sensor technology is going through the roof. Your car has so many sensors. That has driven the technology to be more precise, better calibrated, and extremely low price. And then finally, Lego style system development, where the world has gone from when I started as component design, you take a transistor, you take these different parts and you build something. Now it's much more like a Lego system, where we have full board controllers that have all the memory, the clocks, everything, the communications all built on, and that's just one block. And then we can patch things together, and so we can very quickly develop complex systems that are designed to work together. And so this is part of this cumulative knowledge base that really is emerging as one of the key features of development. And I'm sure you're, as aware as I of telemetry, but maybe you're not as aware of the cost side of this. I run a set of 250, or I help run a set of 250 weather stations across Africa. And to give you a sense for how cell phone communications come down in price, we send data every hour from every station, and each data set has 5-minute observation of about 12 sensors. And we do that, day in, day out, day and night, so 24 hours a day. And so a month of that communication from, let's say, Rwanda or wherever else is 25 cents. So for those of you who are of a similar generation to me, we used to have to go out and get the instrumental data, either hooking up a meter to a device or download data. But now I have the entire continent of Africa, all the data stream for 600 stations coming to me for a couple $100 a month. So it's just absolutely stunning to me. And of course, there's things like Starlink, which has obviously been transformational in many ways. But something that's more important to us sometimes is what's called LoRa to space, which is a much smaller satellite system where when the satellite goes over, you can dump data up to the satellite and then get it back. And those packets are extraordinarily inexpensive. And now the deal is that doesn't require you be in a cell phone coverage area. So there's a whole bunch of opportunities. So really at this point, no place on Earth need be left out of our measurement systems. So I want to talk about, it's all fine and well in theory, but how does this actually materialize? How do we think about, what are some examples of instruments that you can relate to? And I want to start with this idea of canopy interception. And it starts raining and you stand under a tree, and that tree will protect you from the rain for on the order of a quarter inch of rain. What we learned in some research I was part of in South America is that different tree species have completely different interception. And so we saw that the native tree species in Argentina, in this case, captured about 4 times as much water as the pine trees that had been planted as an exotic. And as it turns out, this was a huge deal for the water balance. We couldn't understand how the pine trees were putting on so much more carbon when there's a carbon use ratio where how much water it takes to put up to bring in one carbon molecule. And so we couldn't close that balance until we understood that the interception was 1/4, and that so much rain was being intercepted by the native species that explained the difference in wood product development. If we look at Canada right now, we'll see that there's a huge die-off in pines, and there's a huge stand replacement going on in the entire central US as well. And these new trees will have completely different interception properties. And what will that do? Well, it turns out the interception is that's the first cup at the spigot. And so when we get 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch rainfall events, each of those events is losing on the order of half of its rain to that interception. So when we change that parameter, we change the water balance. But we have no real way to measure this in the field, except by putting hundreds of gauges under trees and kind of crossing our fingers. So what it led me to do, I was on a PhD committee, and I said, well, can't we just weigh the trees and then watch how much they gather? And so what we did is we put quartz rods on the trunk of the tree and use the tree itself as a load cell. And so it's a linear mechanical device, and we put 3 quartz rods around it so we could take into account wind and all that stuff. It was a real project to get all the quartz rods on, hold them at constant temperature. We use quartz because it has a very, very low thermal expansion coefficient. And it turns out, yes, we'd calibrate the tree by putting different weights on it. So here I'm showing some data for putting 40 kilograms and 20 kilograms and then just changing the weight slowly in the right-hand part. And it turns out we can detect on the order of 5 kilograms accurately on a pretty big tree. And so we then went to Ghana, and here we are calibrating a tree in the middle of a cocoa plantation. So we're putting known masses on it and calibrating this tree. And we were able to then watch a rainfall event. So here at about time of 2:30 in the afternoon, a big rainfall event came that compressed the tree, and it was equivalent to about 200 kilograms of water intercepted, and that water evaporated over the next 4 hours. So all of a sudden we could see the actual interception in real time of this tree, and without damaging the tree at all. It was hard. Putting all those sensors in, getting them calibrated, getting the micron level measurements accurate is a challenge. But there was a hidden element here. Notice all that noise. You see all those wiggles? What is that? Well, it turns out any time that there's wind or any vibration in the earth, that got communicated to our system. And so the question is, could we make use of those data somehow? So we thought that this quartz rod method was too hard. So here we were going to my backyard. And what I'm going to do is take this little blue device you see on the right. That's an accelerometer. And it costs about $50. And it is extremely sensitive. And it has a SD card in it, so you can log any amount of data. And basically, I nail that device to the tree. And then we just watch it, and we see the spectral patterns of the tree swaying. And if we think about a mass on a spring, if any of you played piano, tick, 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 the position of the mass and the magnitude of the mass dictates the resonant frequency. So I'm going to calibrate this tree by putting a load in the tree. So I put a 71 kilogram stainless steel rod in the tree, and then watch its impact on the resonant frequency. And this then allows us to watch trees in real time. And this is the leaf out of my oak tree in my backyard. And what we saw was a shift in the primary resonant frequency by almost a factor of 2, which then we could calculate as to being 240% of the mass change. And what that shows is how during the spring bud, all this mass goes to the top of that tree. And we can also do this. So this of course works for interception, but the point I want to make here is it also then opens up a whole treasure trove of opportunity to see the phenology of these plants. Now, this is looking at one tree, but if we want to look at canopy interception, then you might take a video of the entire forest and then back out of the video all the resonant frequencies of all the trees you're seeing. And you could then see species by species what the change in mass was. And so this has now spawned a company that makes tree accelerometers. And I know there's been some recent papers on this video method as well. And so it's, here was a very simple technique that has allowed us to look at the interception in the Amazonian rainforest, in Africa, and in Oregon. I want to talk a little bit about our understanding of how snow melts as well, and some of the instrumentation that we've been working on to tie mathematical analysis with new observations to try to explain the floods that occur when it snows and when the snow melts. And so we've been working on this now for over a decade. There's a number of papers that are involved. I'm just going to focus a little bit here on some instrumentation for the sake of today's discussion. And if you wanted to measure gas movement in snow, so our thesis is that when it rains and there's high humidity air that's oftentimes warm, it might be at 10 degrees C, then that 10 degrees C air holds a lot of water vapor and it's moving in and out of the snow. And when it moves into the snow, all that water condenses. And it's actually the latent heat of condensation, which can be a huge component of the snow melt. And that's been a factor that's been ignored to date. And so we had to, first off, understand how gas moved in snow. And so I started by injecting CO2. Well, CO2 is a terrible tracer. It's water soluble and it's dense, so it plunged into the snow. And it is a high background concentration, as you know, 400 parts per million. And so I said, couldn't there be a better tracer? And it turns out carbon monoxide is phenomenal. So if you ever need to trace gas, you need carbon monoxide because it's an extremely low background concentration, and it's one carbon and one oxygen, which is exactly the same molecular weight as a nitrogen. And so it basically is neutrally buoyant. And it's not water soluble. So when you shoot it into a soil or put it into any environmental system, it's not going to get partitioned into the biomass. And so you can actually have a conservative tracer for gas movement. It's very low cost. And if you work at it at low concentrations, like 1%, you can safely handle it. The sensors are extremely sensitive, having inordinately broad sensitivity range, are very small, extremely inexpensive, and take no power because they've been developed for household use to monitor carbon monoxide. So this is a place we can leverage these little sensors. And so what I did is I built these 4 rods, which are tapered nylon rods. So when you push them into the snow, they keep very tight contact with the snow. Each one of the sensors, there's 5 sensors per rod. There's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry, 7. And each one of the sensors has associated with it a temperature measurement thermocouple. And so I needed to get very accurate thermal profiling of this snow to understand how it was melting. And so how do you measure snow temperature with extreme, with high accuracy and high resolution? It turns out I ran into this technology called distributed fiber optic temperature sensing, DTS, and this is back in 2006. And so I wrapped a pole with fiber optics, and so I could now measure every 4 millimeters along that pole to about 200ths of a degree and have it be extremely thin plastic, so it had low thermal conductivity. And this gave us a better way to measure. And we decided we would compare that to the standard method, which is a thermocouple approach. And here we made this thermocouple probe with 80 thermocouples, which essentially results in a very large copper rod going down to the snow, which then conducts thermal energy, which is not what we want to do. And so here we are in the Plan Mort of Switzerland at 3,500 meters, putting in our sensor probes, where we're going to put in these probes and do injections between them and watch how a T-shaped or an X of these probes can identify upwind, downwind transport of carbon monoxide. This is a plot which is kind of techie in terms of looking at the reported versus the actual thermal profile within the snow, showing that our fiber optic method, which are shown in solid lines, had a steeper gradient than the thermocouple method, which was giving distortions due to the thermal conductivity of the copper. So yeah, the fiber optic method's better. And these are plots showing the tracer movement of CO in the subsurface, and these probes. So we have these 4 probes, and they're separated by 2 meters, between 1, 2, and 3. They're 2 meters apart, and then 4 is 1 meter apart. And what we see is that in about 3,000 seconds, we have transport to the probe. And so one thing, if I want you to take anything out of this, is that gas transport is fast. And so think about when someone lights up a cigarette and how quickly you can smell it. So when we talk about gas transport in subsurface, it is an extremely aggressive transport process. So don't ever ignore diffusion when you're thinking of the subsurface. But furthermore, here we were on a fairly windy day. And it's the transport time, you can see 3 to 1, that was in the direction of the velocity. And there was a tremendous advection also of gas in the snow. So people have really ignored, to an unacceptable degree, the gas transport in snow. Now, if you take this and you combine it with the ventilation, which happens due to the pressure signals of the impinging turbulent structures, what it does is it creates a constant ventilation of that snowpack. And it turns out if you calculate the energy due to that condensation and the change of temperature of the air from 10 degrees to 0, at a velocity of about 3.2 meters per second, the condensation energy and the ventilation energy exceeds all other melting processes. And so if you look at the literature, you'll see many, many papers where the actual rate of melt was very high, but what they would do is say, well, from day 1 to day 2, it all melted. Yes, but if you notice, it melted in an hour, not in 4 hours. So many times the rain on snow events have a high wind associated, and we think it is this wind that is causing the peak flows that we see here in the Northwest especially. Okay, so I hope by this point I've convinced you that there are cool sensors out there and that they will change the world. But how do we change the scientific culture? How do we change our instrumentation culture furthermore? And this is where we decided to do this openly published environmental sensing lab. And this is an open project. And so you can go onto our GitHub site and download every design we've made. And you can see exactly the history, the tracking of that. Here's the roughly 6 month ago team. The team is constantly evolving. Chet Udell, who you see here, is my lab director. And these are all undergraduates who are developing these instrumentation systems. And I can talk about each of these students and how remarkable they are. They're just doing incredible stuff. This was pre-COVID. We have a lab calendar, and in the lab we would typically have 6 to 8 students in the lab at any given moment, all day long. And so the students really are engaged. They love it. They're having a great time up there. This is the GitHub site. And if you look down into this project area, you'll see that we have about 20 active projects making new sensors, and I'm going to now go through a few of those. But basically, you can click on those and get all the details, the full bill of materials for any of these devices, full design drawings, etc. And then also a lot of lab safety stuff and whatever else you need to get going. Here's a little bit of thumbnails of some of our projects. We're doing cosmic ray detection to do water content. We have rainfall calibrating devices that you can 3D print and take to any rain gauge and calibrate them. We have all sorts of samplers. We have a Pied Piper project where we literally we listen for a certain bug and then send out its mating signal, and we can trap leafhoppers and give management advice to farmers. So a bunch of projects going on. I'm going to just talk about a couple of them right now. So this is a project that was led by a physics student, applied physics, where we wanted to make a device to measure the water stress of grapevines. And so you can see the grapes hanging there. And so it's what's called a dendrometer. It measures the size of a stem of a plant. It turns out people to date had been using stainless steel and plastic as their primary constructive materials for these devices. Those all have high thermal coefficients of expansion. When we're trying to measure half micron resolution over the course of a day, where you might have sun hitting the device, this is totally unacceptable. So the first step was, let's use carbon fiber, which has a zero coefficient of thermal expansion. The next thing is that the devices people use are linear actuators or linear measurement devices, which have friction. And so to make them displaced, you actually have to apply a force to them. What we did is we said we want zero mechanical friction in this device, so there's no hysteresis. So instead of using a plunger, we take a spring, hold the device against the plant with a spring force, which has zero friction. There's no sliding parts. And then we use a magnetic encoder to measure the displacement. And in that way, we get half micron repeatable measurements. And so there's a patent that this undergraduate is the first author on, a paper she's first author on, she's given presentations on it. So our undergraduates have now first authored 10 papers and 1 patent. So we love them to take their ideas and make them real. This is a eDNA robotic sampler, so it'll sample 24 times. You can program it to sample. Each sample there's cleaning, then you do a filter step where you get the DNA, and then we do a preservation step where we inject ethanol to the sample. And this same sampler technique, so it's all wirelessly programmed. So the student, you can go up to the thing and just set up your program from your smartphone and let it run. It's a super cool device, very complex. It's been a big development project for us. But that same technology then has led us to be able to make a COVID sampler for Clean Water Services in Portland. And then, as we'll see in a second, we push that technology to make an isotopic sampler for rainfall. So oftentimes these things will kind of spawn a series of projects. This is an example of a very complicated undertaking. Some of these are much, much simpler. Here's what we call the Smart Rock. We wanted a teaching tool. So we have a device here that we developed a 4-wire electrical conductivity sensor for. It measures turbidity, electrical conductivity, pressure, and temperature. And we can also add dissolved oxygen and pH. And basically it runs for a year on 1 charge. And so you pound in a rebar and you strap it to the rebar, and for a couple $100, any student or anybody can monitor a stream. And this was developed for the Swiss citizen science program, and it's now being used in several labs in the United States. It's really taken us a lot longer to build than we thought to make it work, but it's been a really educational process, and I think it's really going to be transformative to be able to put these classical measurements at a reasonable price into the hands of students. I mentioned earlier, rain gauges are a problem, and this is a new design of rain gauge that I think overcomes many of these problems. So the idea here is that we have a self-emptying bucket, which is a self-siphoning bucket, but we've packed it full of fiberglass with a large fiberglass rope, so about a 4-inch diameter fiberglass rope. The idea is that you put this all in a load cell, and when it rains, the rain soaks into the fiberglass, fills it up, and then drains. And you watch the sequence of filling and draining, and that gives you the rainfall rate. And it turns out the advantage here is there's no maximum rainfall rate. We can go to, on the order of 50 centimeters an hour, no problem. So half a meter an hour of rainfall we can measure. So we don't have this sloshing of the tipping bucket. It has this absorbing surface where rain doesn't splash. And it also filters the water so it doesn't ever clog. And so we have a zero maintenance rain gauge. But the cool thing is that you leave a bunch of water in the wick at the end of the rain, and you can actually watch evaporation. So we call it an evaporometer because we can measure not only extreme rainfall events, but we can also observe at 5-minute resolution the rate of evaporation. So we think that that's a parameter that's been way under monitored. Basically, the big pan evaporometers are only good for daily measurements, but now we can see the impact of where you are on the field and how that's changing the crop evaporations, et cetera. So we think that we've been far too satisfied with a bunch of lousy instruments for measuring rainfall. Rainfall is far too important, but also evaporation. We're really at almost a starting point on that whole parameter, and that's unacceptable. Now, of course, Campbell Scientific and others might say that I'm overstating it. They've got their eddy covariance machines, but we can talk eddy covariance all you like. I think we have to make some direct measurements. A parameter that is maybe less familiar with you is isotopic composition of rainfall. It turns out that knowing the isotopic composition of rainfall is extremely useful for understanding flow of water through an environmental system. We can affiliate isotopic changes with how those then push through the full system. So nowadays with these ring down isotopic mass spectrometers, we can do extremely high resolution measurements of isotopes. We need ways to collect them. The current technology that we use, it was highly defective. It had a bunch of problems. I don't have time to go into it, but one of them is it cost $500, and the other one is that it didn't do a good job of keeping the isotopic composition constant. So those two problems are expensive and bad. So we thought, can't we do something better with a 3D printed object? And what we're using is what's called a zero headspace aluminum lined bag. Aluminum has a very, very low diffusion coefficient, and so gas diffusion, so it maintains gas composition really well. And we just put a little floating valve in so that when it rained, water could go in and it would seal it back up. Very simple design. But if you look at our recent tests, and these are just going to be submitted for publication in about 2 weeks. So this is comparing the standard methods, which are the orange, green, and yellow methods. And the yellow one is a bucket with oil floating in it, which is extremely difficult to work with logistically. But the green method is the standard, industry standard as certified by the World Meteorological Organization. And this is looking at the mass loss in time over 30 days. And you can see that our little device, the blue triangles, has less than half the mass loss of these other devices. And then if you look at the actual isotopic composition, so the dashed lines in these 4 figures, looking at the different isotopes of interest, the dashed lines would be perfect reporting. And we see that that the blue sampler does better in all but one, and even in this one, the error is below the level of importance. So the point is that our little kind of $20 sampler actually does a better job than the $500 sampler, and this is something that anyone can make anywhere. You can buy yourself a little $200 printer, print these things up by as many as you like. So I think we really can see that that the technology there's some openings for making things better. So our philosophy at Opens is that we want to change the world, that impact actually is important. It's not okay just to diddle around and put out another paper. We want to actually change things. It isn't just one lab. We have a stream of people from around the world, most recently Israel, Germany, and Utah, and now we have a French team coming. So we have a stream of people coming through the lab to learn how to work with these technologies. All the code is open source, so anyone in the world can grab these and make them. All the publications are open source and peer reviewed. And then we want this evolutionary participatory design that GitHub, with its kind of forked structure, where you can take a design and innovate on it and have that be captured, is really key. We use, kind of nerdy wise, we use this CERN copyright, which is really cool in that it's fully open. But if anyone decides to commercialize it, they are required to keep it open. And so We are currently working towards licensing some of this technology. And the way we're going to license it is that then a commercial company can get around this copyright by licensing it directly from the authors. And so it's a really interesting way to both maintain open sharing and provide enough protection for a commercial interest so they're interested in actually making the stuff. Because if you don't provide any protection, then they won't be interested in investing all the money to make these things. So there's a bunch of pieces here that we've given a lot of thought to. So what have we learned? We learned that undergraduates love these clearly defined problems. They have very limited field research, and they don't realize, they feel terrible when they break things. And I don't know if any of you do field work, but we break things all the time. So first thing is, hey, don't sweat it, things break. Water gets into everything, batteries die fast, all these basic lessons. And what we're doing is actually putting out on the order of 20 new environmental sensing engineers every year. And that, when you look at the size of the industry in the United States, that's a big deal. And so they're learning how to work in teams, they're learning how to do good documentation, and they understand the multidisciplinary nature when you need an electrical engineer, a computer scientist, and a hydrologist or a biophysicist in the team to be able to make something work. And so this is not just an idea for them, this is now just the way they practice. Of course, keep it simple, and that's, I have a whole slide here on that. You all know that. It's something you just have to keep on knocking into our heads every day because things get complicated. And so we now 6 years on, we're still saying, try to keep it simple. I guess there's some frustrations. I haven't been as successful as I would have liked to have been in building an effective collaborative community across the world. And I spend a lot of time running around trying to infect people with this concept. And I think that one of the things I undervalued was how hard this is. It turns out you've got to have a laboratory that can have maintained continuous investment, have backup resources so that when the client maybe loses interest, we can get things over the finish line, have leadership and mentorship that's really in place. It turns out it's a little bit hard. And so we are trying to rethink, how do we really engage the rest of the world? I think our most effective way has been through visiting scientists who come to our lab, and we develop things with them, and then they go on and continue to develop those things. But if you guys have ideas, I would love to hear them. I think it's an unsolved problem. So we are fortunate enough to have long-term funding from the USDA and NSF and the state of Oregon, which really allows us to smooth out some of these bumps and to keep this a very active team. Okay, so what's the upshot with respect to, say, water resources? And I think that we're missing a lot of elephants in the rooms. When we look at floods and we look at the data, we see actually, when we know what to look for, that we're missing a lot of the key processes. We have to recognize that these are complex systems, but we need to measure the componentry of the ingredients very accurately. So we have to have new measurements that can then bolster our theories and redefine our theories and show us where our theories have flaws. And so how might you guys get involved? So think about your undergraduate community. How can you work with them? Think about publishing your designs in open source publications. Feel free to send people to the Opens Labs to help kick off and support your teams to make new sensors or to use new technologies. Think about if you have labs that you think should be part of Opens. We really would like to have more affiliated laboratories. And then also just say, what do you want? If you need something, one of the people came up to us recently who works in Tajikistan, where it turns out they use these pouches on the collars of animals that just distribute seeds. So when animals walk around, they're actually reseeding their own pasture. Well, now they want us to develop an engineered version of that, so we can design the holes and the density and everything to deliver seeds, whatever seeds you want. And so, yeah, great, wonderful problem. So we're actually building that now. So what I want you to do is to kind of tell yourself, this is not some faraway idea. It's real, it's now, and it's free of charge, and you really ought to be involved. So with all of that, and I hasten to say I probably had too many slides. I'd love to hear your questions and your ideas. And so I'm going to stop sharing at this point and see all your lovely faces and be delighted to take any questions you might have.
Well, thank you. John, this was fantastic. Before we open it up, it looked like a lot of your sensors were, do you do any remote sensing on your devices?
Yeah.
Is that a component that's too complicated to interface with your design system?
Yeah, so remote sensing. So we actually got onto the cover of EOS magazine for our drone program, and so we got all excited about drones about 8 years ago when everyone else was getting all excited about drones, I guess. And so we got a hyperspectral camera and a bunch of other thermal cameras and stuff, and we were making measurements. It turns out, I think that drones can be very useful, and remote. Well, first, remote sensing is much broader than drones. Okay, let's start, backing up, but. We feel that our scientific and sensor development is best supported by doing very repeatable and consistent measurements. So dealing with vibration, dealing with battery life issues and drones that come out of the air and stuff like that. So after the drone dropped my $100,000 sensor the second time, I got tired of that. And so what we do is we actually made what's called the hyper rail, and you can find it in publications. And we put our sensors on this rail system, this mobile rail that has wheels up about 2 meters, and we can make it 6 meters long. And we do remote sensing of crops and using a variety of sensors and in greenhouses using this rail system for research, for developing sensors. So rather than going to the drones, which I consider to be more of a instrumentation deployment, that's more of I think, a production tool. From a scientific development standpoint, I find the hyperrail to be far better. Now, that all said, I make extensive use in our research of satellite data, of all sorts of remotely sensed data. And those sensors are really cool and very transformative. And so the hyper spectral sensing that's going on, all the high resolution optical, all the structure from motion in terms of topography and looking at canopy structures and things like that are great. In our lab, we've kind of taken a strategic move to not worry about so much about the platform, and then worry more about the data, the developing the sensors and the data processing.
I only ask because we've got probably thousands of sensors across the state, doing everything from telemetry to birds to rain indicators and weather stations. So I'm just curious on how, what you showed is very compelling, but how could we take your approach when we've got, we've got some data going back to the late 1800s. How do we mesh those two? See, we've got all this legacy data that's imperfect. How do we not lose all of that, possibly for training of AI or not, but also integrate these new models that you have? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I first want to encourage you guys not to lose it. And that is to say that the measurements that were taken over the last 100 years, people were conscious of what was probably the most informative single measurement to make. They had great limitations on what they could get done. And so making very good rainfall measurements or stream flow measurements, et cetera, is really critical historical data. And so I would be surprised if anyone in the state is talking about not using those data. Then integrating those with much denser data streams. Yeah, I mean, data assimilation is huge. And what we're seeing, for example, looking at soil moisture, combining a single soil moisture sensor with an aerial view of the temperature to be able to assess the plant stress and then be able to say, hey, wait a minute, the plant is only that stressed where our sensor is. All the rest of the field is more stressed, therefore the soil moisture is likely different. So being able to extrapolate from a single point to a field scale or to a continuous field of information for the whole state is where we're headed. And so I think that what you're going to find is a lot of those single sensor data are going to be more and more valuable to understand perhaps, for example, how the soil moisture did vary over the last 100 years and how that might be different now. So I think that, yes, it's likely that many of those old data streams will be continued because those are often the first and foremost data we want. They went for the most strategic data they could get. And then we will build on that and be able to essentially extrapolate to full field measurements using all the complementary sensors.
Well, I'd like to open this up to questions. If anybody has any?
I do have a question. I was curious what, for like the microcontrollers, is there a particular development system that you guys are using? Like the Arduinos or Raspberry Pis or, yeah, just.
Right. Yeah, yeah, good question. There's tremendous differences in capability of a lot of these systems, but at some level, if you're walking now and you see a car and you say, wow, that car goes like, 100 times as fast as I walk. Whether it be a Lamborghini, a Tesla, or a VW, or whatever, a Ford Escort, it's still essentially the transformative aspect is that it's going like orders of magnitude faster than you can walk. And so we are using a Feather platform, which is essentially a souped up Arduino, because the international kind of base of knowledge in that technology is really deep, and we are actually able to do the things we want to do with it. And so for kind of proof of concept of sensor systems, we find it to be really great. Clearly, BeagleBones and Raspberry Pis and lots of other things are more powerful. And so we're not opposed to incorporating other systems, but we try to keep our lab as cumulative as possible. So, for example, we have this platform called Loom, which is how we weave things together, our Loom. And so we have all of our sensors in our Loom system. So all of our environmental sensing libraries are integrated. We have a team that can pull in any new device we want. And so basically any client comes in and we can then bring them into Loom and make a new system for them. And that focusing on a single platform has really facilitated our ability to quickly turn around sensing systems. So just recently, for example, our eDNA sampling team needed to have measurements of rainfall. And so we could integrate a tipping bucket or whatever rain gauge you want into their system because it was all based on the same structural programming kind of framework. So yes, we've been using Feather as our platform, which is essentially a souped up Arduino.
Thank you.
I might like to open it up to the folks online. Please raise your hand, unmute yourself when you ask your question, and then mute it back up.
Anybody have any hard measurement problems they want to share?
Well, I have been getting personal messages that they are all just as frustrated with you are for the consistency of lack of consistency of some of the resources. So I think you're preaching to the choir with the current instruments aren't good enough. Let's open up. Any specific questions? Well, while they're thinking, with all of your plans, our groups mostly there aren't a lot of instrument fabricators. If we were to try to look and recruit some undergraduates from the campus to actually do some of the fabricating of your devices, beyond just saying electrical and computer engineering, what kind of traits have you been successful in on what these people look like?
So how what we're looking for in our students is that
So
what
if
you're
we
asking?
take one of your designs and we want to fabricate one of your instruments,
Ah, yeah.
how do we find the right students? Like, what are those because you're not getting general population, you're selecting out somehow these high quality students, which would be great
Yeah.
on our fabricate.
Well, I mean, I didn't really fully appreciate how fundamental the robotics programs are in high schools. And I don't know what your robotics programs look like in Illinois, but here in Oregon, robotics programs are huge in the high school and even the middle school, where basically they develop little robots to do these silly tasks. I consider silly, maybe. But what it does is it develops that ability to work in teams, the ability to understand what a sensor does, how to incorporate sensor data into a control system and data logging system, and how to learn from your experiences of making something that doesn't work. So I would say that at least half, maybe more, of our students have been in a robotics program in high school. That has been huge. So look for students who've already shown interest in and started to get down that track in terms of working in teams and working on with multiple technologies. So we find we have a continuous ad running for students. You know, we recruit on the order of 5 students. So it's about, I guess we recruit 1 new student every 2 weeks. So we're literally bringing a new student every 2 weeks into our program, which drives the front office wild. I mean, we have so much turnover and you know, just the, it's a lot of work to keep them. But if we look at the traits of the successful students, they basically worked with their hands before. Now, that said, we take a lot of students who haven't worked with their hands, but as long as they've got the strong interest. But and I see Laura's got her hand up. We'll get to her in just a second. But I guess take seriously the fact that if you're going to reproduce one of our designs, you're going to have someone in the team who's pretty good at making stuff. Because when you're making things, things go wrong. You have to be able to look at a 3D print and know why it didn't print. So you need someone who's got some experience with printing, someone who's got a little bit of experience with electronics. So those are the things I'd look for. Soldering. Oh, Laura, what was your question?
I think it had a lot to do with recruiting the undergrads again. I am speaking for someone who couldn't attend today, but we have, she has had experience where she's tried different methods of offering practicum credit when there wasn't really money to pay somebody, although it was tough to keep their attention. Have you been finding that really just paying them was the way to keep them around? Because I know she's been through probably 4 students so far to complete a radio system for a very rural area. So that's been a frustration.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Laura. There's several pieces to it. One of them is the fact that undergraduates' lives are complicated. All of a sudden they get voted to be the head of their fraternity, or they get an internship or whatever else. And so first thing we have to do is build teams that have resilience. So that means that we don't invest only in 1 or 2 students. We typically have 4 students in a team. And so that gives us the ability to have people come and go and to carry forward the information. So watch out about using small teams. Secondly, they like to be paid. The funniest thing, anyway, some of you know that I ran for a public office at one point, and the teachers union asked me, do you believe in merit pay? And of course, teachers don't like merit pay for a wide historical set of reasons, which I understand. But I said, well, you know, right now in my undergraduate laboratory, I have a worker action where basically all the students got together and they said, well, you know, we want our compensation to be tied to our achievements. So when we get first author on an article, shouldn't that give us a bump? And so we sat and negotiated. So after 6 months in the lab, they get a pay bump. If they're first author, they get a certain pay bump. If they're second or third or whatever later author, they get a certain pay bump. If they're a project leader designated as such, they get a pay bump. You know, so we have this complex compensation package that the students insisted on, and that are largely symbolic levels. So the pay bumps are of the order of 25 cents an hour to 50 cents an hour. Those are the bumps. And but it's very important to them. And I think any of you who've been through a pay inequity kind of drama, where someone feels like they didn't get the pay increase that they should have or whatever, people in our society closely affiliate your valuation of their efforts to what you're compensating them. So I think that people who are not being paid, there'll be a certain amount of just do it for credit, but they're probably paying for those credits, by the way. And so you can get a certain distance down the way that way, but I think it's also fair to recognize that I'm guessing most of the people on the line here are getting paid for their time here today. And that's really helpful because we can then pay our bills. So undergraduates are under a lot of financial stress. And so I do view getting resources to those students as being a valuable piece of the whole thing. And part of the professionalism, when I'm in a meeting with them, I will often say, wait a minute, this is a cameras on event because this is a professional engagement. We are having a face-to-face meeting. We have to have it be as effective as possible. And I'm sorry, you've got to organize it to have this be as efficient as possible. You got to have your camera on. And they're like, well, that's a privacy issue. Well, then you don't have to work in this lab. If you're finding our privacy concerns to be, if you can't be engaged at the level we need, then that is a problem. So we can raise the expectations on them because we are paying them, because we are saying this is a professional engagement. You are a team leader. You are responsible for giving me a weekly report, and that's the way it has to be. And if that's not a happy place, then then maybe this isn't the right place for you. So we really try to create what we think is the best simulation of a true engineering professional environment we can.
Great. We have another question here.
Yeah, hi there. I've had a lot of experience with like the tipping bucket rain gauges, and I was interested in the design that you guys have is quite intriguing. I was wondering, I'm not sure I was following, is it a prototype stage? Is it something that you guys are using now? And also I was curious about the self-emptying mechanism, kind of how that worked.
Yeah. I mean, I think I got your question. It's a little bit muddled, but I think what you're asking is how is that how does the thing work a little bit in terms of it emptying, and is the design available? And Chad, did I miss anything? What are the key points of it you want me to address?
Yeah, that's pretty much.
That answers it.
So yeah, so what the self-empty, the auto siphoning rain gauge is actually something that has been in the field probably for 100 years. And so what the Germans did initially, as I know it was the Germans, they had a bucket sitting on a table that as it moved down, it would move a ink pen. There was a lever that mechanically moved a pen. So as the bucket dropped, the pen would go up, and the paper cylinder would turn. And what you'd get is a rising line, and then when it finally got to the height, it's like your toilet flushing. When it finally got to the height of the siphon, then that would completely empty the device, and you get a quick downward motion, and then it would rise back up as the rain picked up or continued. So the siphoning rain gauge is really an old concept, and it's been field proven for forever. And it basically relies on a very subtle geometry of that little pipe. So you cannot have it initiate there can be no dribbling. It has to have a full capillary, kind of surface. So when it initiates for real. It can't be any kind of flow over the top with it being partial. So that turned out, that took us several years to get that geometry just right. But that's the idea of a siphon, that the thing fills up and empties, and then you watch it. In our case, rather than displacement, we just watch the mass using a strain gauge. So that's the basic technology. The design is we're continuing to refine it. One of the things we found with it recently was that wind created quite a bit of vibration and it increased the solar radiation hitting the wick. So we wanted to get the conditions at the top of the wick. So we developed a windscreen that goes around it now. And I think that is just being printed this week probably. And we're testing that as an additional piece of the system. But basically, if the basic idea is fairly simple. And all of the designs for the bucket and are printable, and so we'd be happy to share those with you. The idea of using the fiberglass to filter the water essentially is to just get the bird poop and the twigs and sticks and dust out, so that we don't have to have it cleaned. This design really came about when I went to Mount Cameroon in the country of Cameroon, where they get 10 meters of rain a year. So it's 30 feet of rain a year. We needed to have a rain gauge, which we'd never go back and visit because it's almost impossible to get to this place. And it had to be able to take unlimited rainfall capacity. And it had to be solid state, no moving parts. So this rain, that's why we developed it really, and it's been a longer process than I would have expected. Like that siphon took us forever. We tried like so many different designs for siphons, and basically ended up where the Germans had been 50 years ago, and they had used glass blowers to blow. Their siphons were all blown out of glass. And I just said, well, maybe that geometry was really special. And we then started doing the physical analysis and realized, oh yeah, it's the capillarity that they were looking for. So that's a long answer to a short question, but the technology is available. It's basically just a self-siphoning rain gauge, which have been used for many years, with the addition of measurement with a load cell and inclusion of the fiberglass.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions online? Any others in the room? Well, John, thank you so much, especially for getting up so early in the morning to do this. This has been fantastic. I'm sure that as this works its way through our institute, there'll be people who have more questions. If they have questions, can they route them through me just to kind of protect your inbox a little bit? Would that be fine?
Yeah, absolutely. That's yeah, absolutely. And they can also email me if they want to. I don't work so either through chat or me. Everyone, thank you all for attending today, and let us know if we can be of any help to y'all. Okay, and we wish you all the best in monitoring your environment and helping the state manage its resources.
Well, thank you very much, and safe travels.
Thanks so much. We'll see you all around the corner.
Bye.
Take care.